Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Historical Snapshots Conversations. Our guest today is Philippa Lacey Brule. Philippa is a history writer, presenter, and owner and founder of British History Tours, a company for those who love British history and British history events. One of her tours is about Anne Boleyn, who was King Henry VIII's second wife and Queen of England from 1533 to 1536. Her life is the topic of our discussion today. Philippa, welcome. Thank you for coming on the Historical Snapshots podcast.
Hello, Roman. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. So to get started with Anne's life, what does the beginning of her life look like? What are the important experiences in these early years that shape her?
So, Anne Boleyn is a figure who fascinates, and for good reason, which we'll get into, and not least because there's so much debate over her life, and it goes right to the very beginning, which is her birth date. We have no actual evidence of when she was born, and there is a range given from historians between 1501 and 1507, which is a fairly large range. So, because we don't know when she was born, we're also not able to say where she was born. There's two candidates, Blickling Hall, which has been the favourite up until now, and Hever Castle has also been put forward as a possibility, and we certainly know she spent quite a bit of her childhood there, adolescence, and actually her adult life as well. In terms of the experiences that shaped her, it's often said that Anne's family were sort of social climbers, a sort of middle class family who'd done very well from trade. But that completely ignores the fact that Anne's grandmother, a lady called Margaret Boleyn, but nee Butler, she was from the Butler family. The Butler family were in the top 10 wealthiest families in the British Isles. So this is Anne's father's mother. And it's probably actually that link that meant that Thomas Boleyn, her father, married into the powerful Howard family. Her mother was a Howard. So she grew up incredibly comfortably, I think it's safe to say. She had a talent for languages, which she inherited off her father. Her father was an accomplished diplomat. And early on, due to the connections he made, he arranged for Anne to go to the Habsburg court, perhaps somewhere around the summer of 1513. And we don't know how long she was there, probably between a year to 18 months. And she's then, though, sent to France. And the reason being is that Henry VIII's youngest sister, Mary, has been married off to the ageing King Louis XII of France. And Anne has been sent to the French court to be sort of one of her ladies. Now, Louis dies quite soon into the marriage to Mary, the younger Mary Tudor. There's a lot of Mary Tudors, but Henry VIII's sister, Mary Tudor, her husband dies, and so Mary goes back to England, but Anne stays in France, and she goes into the entourage of the new King Francis I's wife, Claude. So she's serving Queen Claude, and she sees, queens in action. The king's mother is an incredibly powerful and interesting woman. So she's having all these experiences at a young age.
Got it. So then what is she like as she enters her adult years?
Well, so yeah, she's summoned back to England in 1521. And this relates back to her Butler family, because there's now a feud between the Butler family and what has become the Boleyn branch of the Butler family as to who's going to inherit the title of Earl of Ormond and all of the lands and whatever that goes with it. And so Anne is being brought back because Wolsey, who's Henry VIII's chief minister and basically the guy who makes everything happen, he's decided that the way to sort this feud is to make one of the Boleyn girls marry their cousin 3 times removed, Seamus Butler, and that will sort it out. That will stop this faction in this very influential and powerful and wealthy family. It's interesting because it actually seems that Anne was the second choice. Her sister Mary seems to have been potentially put forward first, but she's quickly married off to a man called William Carey, which we've always understood, or it's always been said, is, well, that's because she had an affair with Henry VIII and then he's finished with her, so he marries her off quickly. But it's also around this time that they're trying to get her to marry Seamus Butler. So actually, potentially, it's to get her out off the marriage market and is in France. But then Anne gets called back because now Anne is a potential candidate for it. But when she comes back, she starts a courtship with a man called Henry Percy. So it looks like neither sister or actually their Boleyn family are interested in the girls marrying their cousin. So yeah, so she's obviously of marriageable age by 1521 anyway.
So then, when and where does her life with Henry VIII begin?
Well, so before any of these potential marriages could have taken place to, Percy or to their cousin, Henry VIII spies Anne. I'm not completely clear as to when. We know that she performs in a court masque at York Place, which was Wolsey's home. That becomes a big part of Anne's life in the future. But anyway, at this time, it's Wolsey's. And they put on this court masque on the 4th of March 1522, and we know that both Anne and Henry perform in it. Whether or not he notices her at that point is sort of up for debate. I mean, Henry at this point is still married to Catherine of Aragon, who he's been married to since the very beginning of his reign in 1509. So I've not heard it told completely clearly as to when the relationship started proper.
Got it. So he's married, and this was his first marriage, or this was already another marriage in
This
his.
was still his first marriage, yeah.
So do we know, what does their courtship look like? Do we have information or understanding of what that side of their life was like?
Yeah, so historians are divided on this. Like I say, Anne's life throws up a lot of debate, and some see it as a great love story, a romantic story. I'm not of that opinion. I'm very lucky that every year I run a tour called the Anne Boleyn Tour, and we get to do 5 days of discussing Anne's life. And her courtship with Henry comes up very often, and we get to ask historians who join us about it. And the more we look into it and we discuss it, the more I really don't think it was a romance. I think when Anne says to Henry that she will not be his mistress, she will only be his wife. And that's been put down to her sort of playing a game or being very ambitious and sort of just stating, no, I'm going to be your wife. But that's us looking back in retrospect and knowing what happens. She can't be playing a game. There is no game. What's the game she's playing? There's no precedent for this at all. I think she's genuinely thinking that is something she can say which will make him go away. And I mean, it's at points, or we know she retreats to Hever Castle at one point, but unfortunately for her, absence seems to turn to obsession for Henry, and he just bombards her with letters. And this idea that her family are sort of, and especially her father comes in for this criticism that he's in some way pimping out his girls to the king. I think that comes from historical fiction, which is fine. It's a storyline you can follow. But actually, in reality, these women, as we've seen, come from an incredibly wealthy and noble family. Well, but from the Howard side and the Butler side, the idea that they would be willingly despoiling their girls is just, it's not fitting with the time. It's not fitting with the thinking. And if Anne was looking to marry a Butler or a Percy, then the fact that she'd been a mistress to the king, it doesn't matter that it was a king, she's despoiled. They would not be after this. So I think there's multiple pieces of evidence as to why I think it was, to begin with, I think possibly Anne was trying to avoid it completely, and Henry wasn't having any of it.
Interesting. That is really interesting. And so then, but at some point they do become a couple. And how are they as a couple?
They appear to, I think Anne decides that this must be God's chosen path for her. And therefore, this is just, I mean, who knows? Who knows what she's really feeling? But it feels like at some point she gives into it and just says, fine, if this is my lot, this must be God's, plan for me. There must be a reason. I'll go in all in on it. And they appear to get on very well. They spend a lot of time together. They enjoy the same pursuits. Especially, so they're spending a lot of time together. They both had a love of sort of architecture and building. So I mentioned York Place before. York Place was confiscated from Wolsey. Wolsey couldn't get Henry his divorce from Catherine of Aragon, and it ultimately led to his demise, and Henry confiscating Hampton Court Palace, you'd have heard of as well, and York Place. York Place was interesting because actually it didn't belong to Wolsey; it belonged to the Archbishopric of York. But anyway, they looked what we know as Whitehall Palace after that, and Anne was very hands-on in that, and Henry loved that as well. So they do appear to have shared interests, and I think spent a lot of time together.
And in terms
Initially,
of
anyway.
where this all began while he was still married, is that correct?
Yes. In fact, so Henry proposes marriage and Anne accepts, and like I say, whether she's fallen in love with him or whether she just thinks this is her role, you got to remember. So Henry's first marriage hasn't produced a male heir, and we can with our modern sensibilities think, well, girls are better. It matters at this time that there is no male heir. They've only just, with Henry's father, Henry VII, come out of a long civil war. So, and people want peace, and they need an heir. They need a male heir for peace. So it matters. So I think Anne probably is thinking, right, I get it. My role is marry the king, have a son. I mean, maybe the relationship starts proper 1520, around 1526. New Year's Day, or the New Year's gift 1527 that Anne gives to Henry is significant. It's a silver gilt ship, and it has tossing around the waves with a single damsel, if you like, woman in it. And the message is, she sends this to Henry, and the message is sort of, I'm willing to sail these rocky seas with you. Let's go for it. That's how this gift is interpreted. But yeah, I mean, not only is he still married when he proposes to Anne, he's actually still married to Catherine when he marries Anne.
Scandalous.
Yeah.
I want to ask how that worked, but just quickly before that, what was the relationship between a male heir and peace? Why are those connected to each other?
So if you have, we had one instance before this of a female claim to the throne, and that was with Empress Matilda, who was the sole legitimate heir of her father, Henry II. I think I've got that number right. And basically, in her attempts to make that real, led to the anarchy, which was this 19-year period of English civil war. So that's the only example that we had at this time of a female ruler, led to 19 years of civil war. And they've had civil war since. It sort of doesn't quite matter that the men have also argued about who should be on the throne. You have got the added issue, and this will probably come up in our conversation a bit later, but women have a different relationship to men. So a wife has a different, it doesn't matter if she's queen, she's still subservient to her husband. So politically, in terms of power, that has implications. But I mean, we can get into that a bit when we talk about their daughter, I think.
Okay. And so he's still married. Now he's going to marry Anne. How does this all work, and how does their marriage come to be then?
So Henry is trying to get an annulment to his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. And I've gone into this in quite a bit of detail on my channel, actually, if anyone wants to check it out, because it's quite long and detailed. And actually there was an opportunity quite early on in the process for Wolsey to kind of get it done, and he misses it. It ends up taking 6 years to get an annulment. And so within that time, though, Anne is acting as consort. Catherine's banished from court. Anne goes with Henry to France for a court visit in late 1532. And this is when we assume she finally gives in to him and sleeps with him. as in, says, all right, fine, we're going to get married. That's okay. Then we can sleep together. So it's not, even though their relationship probably started proper 1526, she's not, then it's not a full-on sexual relationship until the late 1532. And it's probably on the return leg of that court visit that they make to Francis I in France, where she's acted as queen consort. And like I said, so their first marriage is, so we think there might be two weddings, one which occurred as they landed on this return leg. So he's definitely still married to Catherine of Aragon at that point. They have a second marriage in January 1533 when Anne is in the very early stages of being pregnant, which is why we think they slept together, or started sleeping together earlier than that. But actually, both these weddings, he is still married technically to Catherine of Aragon because Rome never gives an annulment to the marriage. The marriage is eventually annulled by Archbishop Cranmer, who was Henry's Archbishop of Canterbury that he appointed when he set up the Church of England separate from the Pope. So when they have the second wedding in January 1533, is probably already pregnant. I can't see any way that she would have known she was pregnant, because it would have been so early, and her first pregnancy, that I don't think, because some people have put forward, oh, they got married again because she was pregnant. I really don't see how she would have known. But their daughter is born in the September, so she is probably early pregnant. So she when Anne gets a coronation, there's only two of Henry's 6 wives who get a coronation. Catherine of Aragon was crowned alongside Henry IX, and Anne gets her own coronation on the 1st of June 1533. So by this point, she's visibly pregnant. And what's interesting about that, it's a massive ceremony. Henry really went to town on it. But she is crowned with St. Edward's crown, which is the crown reserved for monarchs. And I don't think I came up with this idea myself, but I apologise to whoever sort of put it forward, because it's incredible that she gets crowned with St. Edward's crown. But being visibly pregnant with what everyone assumes to be the Prince of Wales then starts to make sense, because you're crowning the future monarch at the same time. So so that's a possible theory. But yeah, she's when she'd first come back from France, she's seen as charismatic and interesting, and she's got these French influences. By the time she's becoming more, by this point, you start to see people express like doubts about her. She's headstrong. She makes her opinions known. She's getting too involved in things. She needs to keep out of politics. Again, that's another area of debate. Was she actually as involved? Was she always as involved? Etc. Etc. Yeah, she's fascinating.
Is there a sense, if it's not too much of a tangent, was the royal world or just people against her because of the fact that it led to divorce and all of this controversy in the palace? Was there a sense that people were just kind of against her from the beginning?
Yeah, I think the fact that Catherine of Aragon by the time the annulment happened, or by the time Catherine is banished from court, Henry and her have been married now on 20 years, and she's going to have supporters who are, whether they say it out loud, some do, some don't, some definitely do, and they pay the price for it. So, yeah, I think Anne's definitely going to get critics because of the situation she finds herself in, which, she possibly did anticipate right early on in the relationship, when Henry's trying to chase her and she's trying to get away.
But and this is unprecedented, right? In British history, this is the first time this is happening. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, yes, this idea that Anne knew she would become queen and therefore basically gave Henry the choice, I'm queen or I'm nothing. I don't buy it. I think that's us looking at the end point and then having a look at what the route is up to it and thinking that it was somehow planned that way. But no, it's totally unprecedented.
Yeah, that is a really fascinating perspective. So then, how quickly do things go awry, and why do they go awry?
Well, so As I said, Anne's pregnant when she's crowned in the June of 1533. She gives birth to a baby girl in September 1533. And that's the future Elizabeth I. And as we've already made mention, it was a boy that Anne was supposed to have. Everyone expected it. Henry, and the court, the country. This baby had to be a boy. And as I've said, it hugely mattered. Woman, like I said before, even being a queen is subservient to her husband. So how do you find a suitable husband for a queen? So there's one problem. If the queen marries and has children, in order to keep the line going, she risks dying in childbirth. That's another issue. If she gets married or doesn't get married, and therefore the line of succession isn't continued, that's a problem. And all of these problems actually would indeed show themselves in the reigns of two of Henry's daughters. Mary, his daughter with Catherine of Aragon, becomes queen. She marries Philip II of Spain, or he becomes Philip II of Spain after they marry. So there's all those issues there. Lady Jane Grey, who tried to have the throne before Mary, if she wasn't already married to one of the powerful families, the Dudley family, would there have been, I don't know, maybe there wouldn't have been so much of an issue, who knows? And then of course with Elizabeth, who decides not to marry. So actually all those problems do manifest themselves when we see women on the throne. I know that's probably an unpopular thing to say. The other thing that I wonder, and it goes back to Anne's birth date, is how old is Anne when she gives birth to Elizabeth? Because if we go for a middle of that range that I gave, 1501 to 1507, and we go for 1504, she's already 31 years old when she gives birth to Elizabeth. So, again, we can say, oh, well, women give birth into their 40s. They do, but it is unusual and it is difficult. It's dangerous. And even today, and think about it 500 years ago. But she does get pregnant again, perhaps another 2 times. We know she miscarries in early 1536. She miscarries on the same day that Catherine of Aragon is laid to rest in Peterborough Abbey, in fact, and a few days after Henry had suffered a bad jousting accident. Now, whether the miscarriage caused what happened next and her downfall, I'm not sure. I don't know that we can 100% say it causes it. What I would say, though, on the flip side is, had she given birth to a healthy boy who had lived, what happened next would not have happened.
And so what happens next?
So what happens next in the saga of Anne's life? Well, so she finds herself arrested at Greenwich Palace on the 2nd of May, so we're in 1536 now, and taken to the Tower of London. She's accused of multiple counts of adultery with 5 men of the court, including her own brother, George Boleyn. So there's an incest charge in there. And also for imagining the king's death. And imagining the king's death is a treasonable, is treason and is punishable by death. So we've come into another completely unprecedented event here, a queen being put on trial. And obviously we're very familiar with it. So I think we can get a little bit, I don't know, because we are familiar with it, maybe we lose the shock factor of this, how it would have felt at the time. She's taken to the Tower, as are the 5 men accused alongside her, and they're often forgotten, and their names are often not mentioned, but Henry Norris, George Boleyn, William Brereton, Francis Weston, and Mark Smeaton. There was another 2 men taken to the Tower, but they weren't convicted. Thomas Wyatt, who was the poet you might have heard of, and Richard Page. But the charges that they put against her were purposely lewd and disgusting. They were designed to shock and disgust those who heard them. And also what that does is it makes it very difficult to defend them. Because if you say anything about, it would have sounded like they were defending the act, as opposed to that's never going to have happened, because it's the king, and it's his powerful counsellor by this point, Thomas Cromwell, who are putting these charges against her and these men, and they write them in quite what's the word? Quite detailed terms. I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but they say things like, Anne following daily her frail and carnal lust with the king's familiar servants. She gets them into base conversations and kisses, touchings, gifts, and other infamous incitations, and that several yielded to her vile provocations. They don't hold back with what they say. They talk about her and her inciting her brother to put his tongue in her mouth, and her, they really go into it, which makes it very difficult to defend, because, like I said earlier, it almost sounds like you're defending they're saying this is what's happened. So it makes people sound like they're defending the act. It was written as a stitch up. I think there's little doubt now, if you look into it, that they are false. The accusations were completely false. They give dates and they give dates and places where these meetings were supposed to have happened, which could easily have been shown to be impossible, and somewhere else on the date that they claim she's having an affair with her brother. But then they'll just put a catch-all on the end. And this place, this time, this place, this time, this place, and various other dates and places. Okay, just this like major catch-all at the end. But I think they're quite ludicrous, the charges. We can get into why, but what happens next is they are all tried. So Anne Boleyn and her brother George are tried in the Great Hall at the Tower of London. The other men are tried at Westminster Hall, but that does mean that Anne never leaves the Tower of London, because she's convicted and she is executed within the Tower walls on the 19th of May. So Anne is then buried in St Peter ad Vincula, which is the church inside the Tower of London. And so she's still there. So she went in on the 2nd of May, 1536, and has never left.
And so you mentioned why the charges may have been ludicrous. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so if you think about it, she's supposed to be, the way they write it, really one of the most powerful, persuasive seductresses that has ever lived. You've got him. This is the court of Henry VIII. He's not known for being the most balanced guy, and yet she's supposed to be able to persuade, these 5 men to commit adultery with her. They're also that her lust is so insatiable that she'll go as far as to incite her own brother into bed, that she's got multiple lovers, all of whom supposedly know about each other, and she's managing their jealousy through giving them gifts and promises that, well, should the king die, I'll marry one of you, as if that would somehow keep the peace. And all of this supposedly under the nose of Henry and the rest of the court. So yeah, I can't see how any of it stands. And I spoke to a historian, Gareth Russell, who wrote a biography on Henry's 5th wife, Catherine Howard, and I interviewed him because I was really interested in Henry's reaction to when Catherine Howard was actually found to at least be planning to potentially commit adultery, compared to Anne. And his reaction is very different. And I think that's quite telling as well. He's proposing to Jane Seymour before Anne's killed, and they're married within a couple of days. He's just so cold about the whole thing.
So how do you think history remembers Anne, and how accurate would you say the portrayal is?
So I think history remembers Anne, or how history remembers Anne, depends on what you read, when it was written, what you watch. I think the narrative around Anne has changed, certainly, from her being a scheming, power mad, brutally ambitious husband stealer who got what she deserved, which has been a a theme, to being the victim of a brutal husband who, I mean, he has a habit of utterly destroying people he no longer wants in his life. Anne is not the only person that he takes out and tries to annihilate them and their memory. And yeah, like I say, when we do the Anne Boleyn tour each year, it's really it's a great opportunity. We just go in depth and we talk about all of this and all these, how she is remembered and how it's interesting because people sometimes, well, sorry, if I go back a bit, the charges, there's the debate about whether the charges are real or not. And I think that's changed now. Unless you're very new to the topic, of course, fair enough. But I think generally, if you've been around the story of Anne Boleyn for a while, I think it's generally accepted now that those charges were false and made up in order to get Anne and get some of the men with her.
Interesting. So, taking the historian lens to the story, what would you say is the lesson, or maybe some lessons to take from Anne's life?
I'm not sure if there's direct lessons we can take from Anne's life, because we have to remember she lived in a very different time, but also a very different social class. But probably, no offense to anybody, but probably to everyone listening, she's royal family. She's up there. But saying that, I think she's definitely an inspiration to many people, including myself. I think her ability to articulate herself. I mean, apparently she really did well at her trial. She composes herself and speaks eloquently and defends herself eloquently. She knows it's a done deal, probably, but she keeps her calm. And she's intelligent. She clearly loves her child and her family. And I think her willingness to embrace the path that, like I said earlier, that God has set out for her. I think her life, though, is a cautionary tale, and perhaps it's that as well that us mere mortals can take from it. And that's just really basic. It's avoiding getting into a bad relationship with a bad person, which, like I say, I think Anne actually did try to do. I think she did try to avoid it, but she was thwarted and paid the ultimate price. And another thing I think, though, we can learn from looking at Anne's life, and it's something that comes up when around each year when it gets to her execution time, and that's maybe I see it more because I'm posting about it, but people saying she deserved her fate because she wasn't very nice to Catherine of Aragon, or she boxed Mary Tudor's ears and things like that. And I just think we need to remember she had her head cut off. This isn't this. When you're talking about someone deserving their fate, I think it's an opportunity to take a bit of a step back and think about that and the attitude. So, because it's not only her brother. So her parents lost 2 of their surviving 3 children, and all the other men who lost their lives as well. It's not just Anne who was taken in May 1536.
So, as a final question, is there anything that you feel like we didn't discuss, but you think we should about Anne's life?
Well, maybe not about Anne's life. What comes to mind is this recurring thought that I have, which is that Henry VIII, had he not had 6 wives, would have been an unremarkable king. And I don't think that without Anne, in particular, although his other wives deserve mentioning, but without Anne in particular, I don't think Henry VIII would get as much airtime as he does. So that's all.
Well, Philippa, thank you so much. This was a really interesting conversation. Appreciate you coming on the podcast. And yeah, thank you again.
You're so welcome. I hope you enjoyed it.
Absolutely.